And happy 2024 to everyone. Welcome to Unpacking Endpoint Management. I'm your co-host, Steve Thomas. Our other co-host, Danny Guillory, will be joining us later as he's still recovering from his mass excitement over the last weekend's American football games. Also with me is our moderator and adult supervision, Rochelle Blanchard. How are you, Rochelle? Good to have you back with us. We missed you the last time.
Thank you.
And we're welcoming our special guest this month back. He's appeared on our show before, Mr. Clay Taylor. Clay Taylor is a principal PM architect, PM as in product manager architect with the Microsoft Intune team. And he also is a key stakeholder in our internal various zero trust virtual teams here at Microsoft. And we thought it would be a great time with a lot of recent announcements and innovations from Charlie Bell, our executive vice president, and Rajesh Jha, another executive vice president, on many of the secure future initiatives that are coming down the pipeline from Microsoft. And also that Clay recently published a blog on the Windows IT Pro blog on reminding us on some network security basics and some other zero trust principles. With all that being said, I thought it would be a good idea to have Clay come back and talk to us about what's been going on with Microsoft and zero trust and Microsoft's zero trust work in the last 18 months, I believe. I believe it's been 18 months since we've had him on. It may somewhere around there. I'll have to check with the producers. We'll see. But Clay, it's good to have you back. Clay is joining us from South Carolina, right?
That's right, Steve. Thanks for having me. And I am joining from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm actually visiting with my parents for the week. And as you can see, not my normal background here. This is actually at their house, but it's great to be able to see them and spend some time with my family while working remotely in a zero trust fashion.
That's right. And of course, when we're at mom and dad's house, we have to behave. So, Rochelle, looks like you're joining us from the mothership up in Redmond, correct?
I am. I came into the office today. It is very quiet so far. So fingers crossed we don't have any interruptions, but it feels good to be away from my house and around other adults.
That's great. It looks very Microsoft-y there.
Oh, yes.
I'm a little bit nostalgic. I'm still
No
stuck
filter.
here in the shed. Yeah. I'm still stuck here in the shed down in Texas. And so, Clay, in summary, what's Microsoft been up to with zero trust in the last 18 months?
Great question, Steve. Well, I guess first I'll start by saying what's stayed the same. So at Microsoft, we basically have wrapped our zero trust story around three core principles, which are verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and assume compromise or assume breach, as we used to call it. And basically, we've really started trending to, instead of looking at this product by product, really looking at an end-to-end security story and being able to tell our customers how to deploy, not just for a single product with zero trust, but how do you actually enable end-to-end security with zero trust, and how do you actually enable cross-product coherency with zero trust. And it's something that we've been really focused on for the past year to 6 months. We've been doing a lot of initiatives working with organizations like NIST on their zero trust guidance, and it's really kind of opened our eyes to some of the misnomers and some of the incorrect assumptions that are out there about zero trust, especially the fact that some of us, even internally at Microsoft, and especially a lot of third parties that we've been hearing about from customers, they're telling customers that zero trust can be achieved overnight. And, it's really just not that simple. And one of the things that we've been focused on is how do we actually enable customers to deploy end-to-end and understand that it's not, a 1 or 2 day process. It's not just a couple of knobs you have to tweak. It's literally thousands of steps. And what we're working on now is actually, hey, how do we simplify that? How do we get it down to a more reasonable amount of time that it takes to deploy zero trust? And how do we enable our customers to do that? And that's really what our focus has been on lately. We've also had some very exciting product announcements in the space, including things like intra-private access, our ZTNA, our Zero Trust Network Access appliance that we've just recently announced. Some of the Intune suite features that are coming, like Cloud PKI and Endpoint Privilege Management, tie directly into our Zero Trust story. And to me, even a lot of our recent announcements with Windows 365 and things like MAM for Windows are also things that have tied in directly to Zero Trust and really are helping us build out our entire end-to-end security story for Zero Trust in areas that we really didn't have a solution for before.
Yeah. All of those are just amazing innovations, and they really have me excited. What about the innovation that's been happening over the last year in generative AI, like with Copilot and some of the intra stuff? How is that tying into Zero Trust in our strategy around that?
You know, Steve, I get asked about how generative AI and Copilot are tying into our Zero Trust story all the time, and honestly, we are heavily focused in those areas. It's something that we see a lot of product innovation on, but we're on the Zero Trust virtual teams at Microsoft. We're really looking at, hey, how do we actually use that AI technology to help customers enable Zero Trust, to help take some of the, what I'll call grueling and repetitive task out of the daily Zero Trust initiative or daily Zero Trust requirements. And that's really how we're looking at it. Like we're looking at things like, hey, as an Intune admin or as an intra admin, what are some of the shortcuts that AI could do to go help me look for devices that may not be fitting into the Zero Trust framework? How can I go look for possibly compromised devices that were, basically verified as being compromised or that haven't checked in a while? How do I go make sure that those are protected and safe without having to do a lot of manual work? And that's really the way we've been, applying AI with the Zero Trust lens. Any other specific questions there?
Well, I wanted to circle back to something that I think was mentioned at the top of the show, the Secure Future Initiative. Can you give an overview of that?
Yeah. So when I think of the Secure Future Initiative, I like to use Charlie Bell's quote, which is security is not just a technical problem. It's also a human one. And to me, that has really resonated with me in the way I think about, secure futures, not just for us at Microsoft, but for our customers. And, we basically at Microsoft broken that down into 3 different categories. Basically, transforming software development is number 1. This is actually how we can, use things like AI to better secure our software development. How do we actually, implement new identity protections using AI? Also, how do we actually go apply baselines? Like we've recently just applied the Azure tenant controls to all of our internal tenants by default. And it's really looking at, hey, how do we apply defaults? How do we use AI to look at which defaults we should be applying? And how do we actually enable that for customers, when they first spin these solutions up without them having to go and turn them on manually? And that's really the first big step to this Secure Future Initiative. The second one is basically implementing new identity protections. And, this is not only implementing new protections, but it's also, once again, applying things like MFA or multi-factor authentication by default. This is something that we've just recently turned on. I will tell you that we're looking at other places where we could possibly turn these things on by default so that we don't have so many customers that are honestly insecure by default. We're really trying to make these, as soon as the customer were to purchase these products, we want to make sure that they're turned on in a way that, 1, aren't too impactful to their end user environment, but 2, enable security controls that we really think are absolutely the baseline and the absoluteness, minimum necessary to secure your environment. And that's really, in my opinion, probably the most important part of this initiative. And it's something that you as a customer, you're probably going to be seeing more and more of in the coming months and years. But we are looking at ways that we can enable these things by default. Third, is, as part of this initiative is basically driving faster
Well, that's
vulnerability.
interesting.
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
No. You go ahead.
Yeah, the third one, is basically being able to push the envelope in vulnerability response, and basically say, hey, we really need to reduce the time that it takes to mitigate these cloud vulnerabilities. And I think our goal is to minimize that or reduce that by 50%. And we're basically able to do this because of our investment in AI. And it's really exciting to see how we're using AI to actually reduce our, time to resolve incidents and to allow customers to resolve these incidents faster.
You brought
Steve,
up a good
you
point
want to chime
about
in?
the human problem too. Yeah, we wanted to circle back as well because you mentioned that there's a human problem to security that is going to involve, at the end of the day, a lifestyle or an evolution in practice. I've always said that we will have evolved and got there when my 80-year-old mother turns on multi-factor authentication on her new phone without giving it a second thought. Just like, everyone of all ages is using their phone and evolving. We need to incorporate security and that mindset into that second nature. And that's where the human, evolution aspect of it comes in as well. Clay,
Steve, on that note, I just have to say, go ahead.
Work internally for.
Steve, I was just going to say,
I think I got a delay on my end. Go ahead, Clay.
Steve, I was just going to say, I really appreciate the example that you just gave around, your mother using MFA. And it's something that, I'm home visiting with my parents. And every time I come here, one of the first things I do is ask them what new accounts they've set up and actually go through with them and go set up things like MFA. And also some monitoring and stuff like that as well for them. And, it's something that it's so imperative. And I think that it's something that we're seeing that it's not just, for home users, it's also for enterprise users. We really need to be thinking like, hey, how can we turn these things on by default? How can we automatically have MFA for all users enabled? How can we automatically apply these security baselines for things that in the past just took this manual work and this manual effort, as well as a delay and a lag before we actually saw them implemented for these devices and these users. And we're really having, with a zero trust mindset, we're really having to think, hey, why are we waiting? Why are we waiting to turn these things on? Why are we waiting for our end users to dictate when we turn these things on, when we really need to turn them on by default? And because those same end users are going to be the ones that fall for these attacks.
Yeah, speaking of that, I know we've all been sharing parent stories, but my mom just got scammed, and she actually works in the mortgage industry, and she gets trained on avoiding these types of scams. And that's just kind of goes to show you how smart these scammers have gotten and how we really do need to kind of step in and put things in place by default, because that human element can't always be solved for. So just an interesting time that we're in right now.
Right.
We do have a question from X. What is the best way to enforce policy and compliance on multi-tenant devices like those used by contractors with BYOD?
Sure. So actually, Rochelle, can you repeat the question for me one more time?
Yeah. What is the best way to enforce policy and compliance on multi-tenant devices like those used by contractors with BYOD?
Sure. So for multi-tenant devices, first thing I'll say is that I always like to start with MAM. With MAM, or mobile application management, we have a means to actually apply controls at the application level, whether or not that device is managed or unmanaged. And especially in the contractor scenario, it actually really allows us to apply those restrictions at the app level, even if that third-party contractor is managing their end user devices with full MDM, we can still apply our controls at the application level for that contractor when they're accessing any of our corporate resources and through our applications. And it's honestly, to me, the easiest way to mitigate a lot of these cross-tenant vulnerabilities and basically fill in those gaps for cross-tenant devices. That being said, we are absolutely looking at ways to improve this for fully MDM managed devices. For Windows, we've just recently released some of our Windows for MAM capabilities, and I believe that just went GA. If not, it's in a public preview. But we, are really focused on how can we enable this. And the other area that I would say makes this much easier is to actually apply those controls to like a Windows 365 environment, where it doesn't matter how that employee is logging in, like what device they're logging in from. They're basically going to launch a Windows 365. I actually like to call it like a zero trust Windows 365 environment, and be able to launch that from a third-party fully managed MDM, fully MDM managed device, and then basically have a fully protected VM or a Windows 365 environment where they can actually do their day-to-day work for you as the hiring body for that contractor.
Awesome, thanks. And just to reiterate what that URL is there, aka.ms/MAM deployment, MAM deployment.
Awesome.
We've got a friend. Welcome, Danny.
So as we bring Danny on, I wanted to ask you, Clay, about how Microsoft is doing zero trust internally. I know that you have a background in whatever we call our internal IT this week. I've always called it MSIT, but I've been at Microsoft a long time, and I remember the painful days when I would dread having a domain join my machine, because that was back in the day when we had to use policy to overcome everything that we were doing to maintain security. So you knew that we were going to, as soon as you joined that domain every morning when you logged on, you might as well go get coffee after you logged on, because it was going to take about 30 minutes for all the dang policies to process. And it's just the experience now with Microsoft's internal modern management is just so much better. And it's amazing how, as a remote worker, I feel more optimized than I was when I worked in the office.
Absolutely. And Steve, I've just seen this dramatic shift in the way that we are managing our own infrastructure and how we're actually applying these zero trust principles to our own deployment. Brett Arsenault and now Igor, our newly appointed CISO, and Brett before him, they have really taken to heart this, what they call zero trust or bust initiative, where we are really thinking about how, we can be the first and best customer for zero trust internally at Microsoft. And we're very well along on our journey. We have weekly meetings, Steve, which I'm still involved in today, that, basically we go through and we say, hey, these are the requirements for zero trust. Where do we still have gaps in our products? Where do we still have gaps in our services? Where do we still have gaps in the way that we're actually doing our deployments with our zero trust story? And we're plugging away every week to try to patch those areas and to fill in those gaps that we have. It's something that has been top of mind. Brett will mention zero trust or bust on all of our internal trainings, et cetera. But what I've really seen, as you mentioned, is, we're starting to, it's starting to make us think about zero trust and an end user perspective. And hey, how do we actually implement these things without being extremely impactful to our end users and stopping the way they do business? And a great example of this is our endpoint privilege management feature, which we've actually rolled out internally to most of our internal users. And when we first rolled it out 6 months ago, started rolling it out, I was one of the initial, of course, I'm lucky. I was one of the initial people who had that turned on for myself. And, it wasn't exactly what I would call user-friendly. And through over the months, we've really worked to improve that end user experience, at the same time being able to apply those, the principle of use least privilege access, which is one of our core free zero trust principles. We've really been focused on how do we actually not only apply that, but make it not, make it so it's not completely obtrusive to the end user.
But Clay, you've been on zero trust like forever. Like I remember when we would bring customers to Redmond to talk about it.
Oh yeah.
And times when we were like, "Hey, what do I install?" Like, no, it's not install, right? Like, so like I'm curious.
You're right. Yeah, it's not a product.
I'm curious to know what's the most exciting part about how you've seen it grow, because you were one of the pioneers with this whole zero trust thing with other customers.
That's a great question. And to me, the most exciting part about zero trust is seeing it evolve from, what I consider this hand wavy, I won't say marketing type approach to zero trust, but I'll say what I've seen is it's kind of evolved from quickly becoming a buzzword to actually becoming a deployment objective. And what I've seen is that customers, we just sent out a survey last week. Actually, we've already had well over 100 respondees to this survey. And what we're seeing is that, close to 70% of customers now have started their zero trust journey. When we asked this same question 2 years ago, it was like 6%. So, to me, what's most exciting is seeing customers actually starting the journey and actually starting to realize, hey, I need to do this. And it's not going to be an overnight process, but I need to get started. And so I'm so excited about, just seeing this quick move to, to being able to help customers actually deploy this. And it's one of the areas that we've been focusing on is, how do we change our documentation to where it's not just focused on, quick wins, and it's not just focused on where to get started. It's really focused on, hey, how do I deploy zero trust end to end? And we've just recently released a couple of blog posts, which we'll put in chat, around best practices for zero trust deployment. Basically, some updates to deploying our zero trust solutions holistically, as well as a new zero trust assessment tool that I will tell you that this is a work in progress, but it's something that, I honestly have spent about a year of my time where this has been the largest part of my week is working on this zero trust assessment tool. We also have, people from the identity teams and from other teams that have been working with us on this assessment tool. But the AKA is aka.ms/ZT assess. And, it's something that you can run on your own tenant. All the requirements, et cetera, are listed on that particular website, which, Steve, if you can paste that in, or Michelle, somebody, if you can paste that in chat, that'd be great. But you can actually go run this assessment on your internal tenant. We will not have access to that unless you decide to set up a meeting and share it with us. But we're really working with customers to get over that initial, buzzword type approach to zero trust, where we did a bunch of hand wavy stuff and said, hey, all you have to do is go apply zero trust to these 6 pillars, and you're great. And we've really realized that it's so much more than that. And it's really thinking about every single step of your deployment with a zero trust lens and applying those 3 principles to every single step of your deployment across things that you normally wouldn't even consider to be, zero trust. It's really thinking about it with a zero trust lens across the board. If you run that tool, you'll actually see that not only does it give you drop-down menus where you can kind of mark your progress, we've also got an assessment tool that will go and basically run a check against your tenant and say, hey, these are the areas that I'm doing well. These are the areas that I've started in my zero trust journey. And these are the areas that I need to go look at next. It also will actually give you a dump of things like your Intune policy. So you can actually compare those side by side. And we are looking at, hey, how do we actually use AI and some of our new Copilot capabilities to take a lot of this manual work out out of the process. But right now it is a little bit manual, but we actually are now giving you a way to kind of compare and contrast your policies. And in working with customers, on this Zero Trust workshop, I've found some really interesting things. And one of those, the biggest learnings that I've had is that customers tend to go set something. And so we'll just say that they go set a enrollment policy or enrollment restriction policy that says, hey, we're going to block this particular type of device from enrolling. And that may have been based on something that was set a vulnerability from 5 years ago, and they just never go back and change that. Or they go and they set their compliance policy to tag a device that is, not healthy as not compliant, but they don't actually go and create a conditional access policy to block access for those devices. And I've had multiple situations, even in the past 3 weeks, where we've been running through this workshop with customers and the Zero Trust assessment with customers, and we found that they, they're part of the way, but they basically either went and set these things years ago, or they had someone who went and set this policy and then left the company or changed roles, and they just never went back and set it, or they didn't know to go back and set it. So one of the things that I'm asking customers to do as part of these workshops is make sure you're at least going through and checking up, doing this assessment once every 6 months or so, just to make sure that you're keeping up with these items and make sure that you're things haven't changed. There's lots of different solutions out there that we're adding to our products. There's lots of different OEM and third-party vendor products that are changing daily and monthly and weekly. And as they add new functions and functionality to those products, you just have to make sure that we go back and make the changes to enable the new security functions, or the basically turn on things that we had turned off, or turn off things that we had turned on before, based on the evolving landscape that we're seeing around us.
Okay, before we get to the next question, I do want to remind our producers that I should have taken that bet that the only reason Danny is late is so he can sneak on with his baseball cap. And if he gets to wear one, so do I. Because we're already champions. You guys aren't champions just yet. Just wanted to for you. But anyway, back to reality here. So Clay, if identity is now the ultimate barrier, should I continue to configure complex Windows firewall rules, or what practices can I let go of?
Steve, that's a great question.
And if no,
go ahead.
What should I be doing?
Poor Steve.
Okay, it's not just me. So
nope. Go ahead, Clay.
Danny, you're on mute.
I wish I could finish the sentence for him, but I have no clue where he was going with that.
Okay, so when it comes to your identities, and basically, I think Steve said that now that identity is the ultimate barrier, should I continue to configure things like complex Windows firewall solutions? And the answer is you basically have to until you are, moving to an identity-based approach. And I'll also say that we're also releasing new tools, like our intra-private access, where we actually, are applying things like Zero Trust network access to our overall story, which is an area where we're missing before, which is honestly one of the main reasons why we really push this identity-centric approach, is that we didn't have a great solution there. And on the network-centric approach, but we are, definitely moving into that space. That being said, I think that the identity-centric approach is absolutely the way to go. I think it's always going to be a cheaper, more cost-effective way to more securely protect your endpoints and your end users. But at the same time, I think that, enabling yourself to move to identity-centric approach is the first thing that you should look at doing. And I wouldn't say that you just go turn off your complex firewall rules, because you have to first make sure that you have an identity-centric security approach that will, mitigate the attacks that would be coming, before be coming through that firewall, and make sure that you're not actually requiring, VPN connections anymore to access those resources, because you don't want to turn off those protections at the firewall if you still have users connecting to, your internal network via VPN. That's just not going to work out well for you. So yeah, I would say that absolutely your end goal should be to move towards that identity-centric approach. At the same time, you have to basically enable that first before you can start turning things off.
Yeah, I've always liked the identity-centric approach, and I still haven't got used to saying or intra. But the whole identity-centric approach, I think I gravitated to more kind of what Steve was talking about, domain joining your device and having all these policies. I think what's really attractive about the identity-centric approach is that if you do it correctly, the security travels with the user, regardless of the device. So when you look at it from a end user perspective and being able to move the security or have the security follow the end user, I think that from a security perspective gets really exciting and enticing, because now you can have a more holistic picture around the end user that also encompasses the device and the things that they're accessing, rather than just looking at the security of the device. So from a security standpoint, the identity-based security is really the best approach, in my opinion.
Totally agree.
All right, I won't keep rambling. I know there's questions. Go ahead.
Well, first, I want to thank everyone who's tuning in on LinkedIn. I think we have a pretty good group on that end. So hello, everyone on LinkedIn. We have a question from Bhaskar, and I hope I didn't butcher your name, but from Bhaskar on Tech Community. What are the best practices for implementing Zero Trust in Windows 365 via Intune?
Great question. So with Windows 365, we have a lot of deployment mechanisms. The main thing I will say is that make sure that you're managing your Windows 365 environment just like you would manage your physical hardware and your physical endpoints. It's really all about enabling those same workloads that you enable on your physical devices in Windows 365. Making sure that you're applying your security baselines, that you are, going with, Windows 11 for one thing, with those Windows 365 environments, and really just thinking, once again, applying those zero trust principles, applying compliance policies, looking at things like Windows or MAM for Windows to further protect and secure those Windows 365 sessions. It's really thinking about Windows 365 the same way that you would think about someone's standard desktop. And we also have some additional tools available for monitoring just the end user experience, and with our Windows 365 blades for endpoint analytics, we have some specific areas that we can actually look at performance and things like RAM and CPU spikes that we didn't have, we don't even have available today for your physical endpoints, but we can actually monitor those things on your Windows 365 environment. And to me, it's just really an easy way to apply zero trust and to actually give your users a zero trust workstation without having to actually buy them a physical device in a lot of cases.
Awesome. Thanks, Clay. We have a question from X. I'll let you guys fight over who takes it. At what point can we get rid of VPNs completely?
Now. Stop using them. I think I'll elaborate now. Let Clay give the answer. I think once you adopt more cloud and you actually don't need it, and I feel like some of this growth is like I don't know, cross-pollination of flowers, right? Like whenever you kind of figure that out as you go through the process, right? Once you start using more cloud, you start adopting more of that security, then natural evolution is, when do I start getting rid of I call them agents, but don't bite on that specifically, right? When can I start getting rid of said tools, right? Because then you start looking at cost and how cost of operation. For me, those things just end up being they were a natural evolution. Like every year, assessing what I was spending and what my security standpoints were, and then figuring out, do I still need that? Wait, are we still accessible? Who's still logging into VPN? Why are we still? At some point, just natural evolution of your journey through the IT, and especially partnering with more security, those type of doors open up, and then you can evaluate how far you want to go down that hallway to figure out if you want to remove it or not. Like I think that's more practical. But Clay, you give your thoughts.
Yeah, totally agree, Danny. And Michael Wallant just released the first of a 3-part blog series where it's really all about now being the time to move to cloud native. And Jason Rozak just, I think, posted the follow-up yesterday to this, which we will post in chat for you. But honestly, as Danny said, now is the time. I will say that every customer that I've been working with on their zero trust journey, and as part of that, moving away from this VPN dependency and basically moving away from using your network perimeter as your safety net, now is the time to do that. And we're at a point where I finally feel comfortable saying that, and where I finally feel comfortable saying that, hey, we have the tools that you need to get there. It's not always going to be a perfectly easy overnight process. There are things that our customers, what I'm finding is that our customers have been dependent on some network-based perimeter requirements for so many years that it's really just, set in their and they're set in their ways, and it takes a while to actually get them to start thinking about this. And what I've found is that, the first thing is starting with, looking at your group policy and saying, hey, do I really need all of these things that are, in a lot of cases, legacy group policy, a lot of things that aren't even being supported anymore by Windows. A lot of group policies aren't supported anymore. A lot of group policies that really aren't doing what they used to do a few years ago. Actually going through and basically starting, with a greenfield and saying, hey, which of these things do I actually need to move over? And basically starting with all of their new devices and moving those devices over to cloud native. For your existing devices, I personally think that it's 100% okay to take a little bit longer and to start with things like co-management and cloud attach, which I know Danny, it has been at the very spearhead of that, initiative to allow customers to make it not just a destination, but a journey where they are, starting out with something like hybrid join, hybrid intra-join, and co-management, and then having the end goal always be to be cloud native. And, as I said, start with your new devices, move those to cloud native right out the box. Have policies set aside for those that are, going to be 100% cloud native policies. Make sure that you are working with your security department to our security team to make sure that you are hitting all your requirements. But at the same time, we're here to help. We're happy to help provide guidance in those areas. We have plenty of blog posts out there on, how we recommend to get to this point. But, start slow for your existing devices and, move those over, one workload at a time. But I would say that now's the time to start moving all those workloads over as you can. Don't just sit on moving 1 or 2 workloads over for co-management. There's a lot of customers that I've been talking to as part of the Zero Trust Workshop where we actually go through each of those workloads. And when I started asking why they haven't moved certain sliders over, every single time the answer's been, well, we just, haven't really taken the time to see what the impact would be. And I'll tell you that every time that we start moving those sliders over, the impact is a lot less than expected. You just have to make sure that you're testing and make sure that you're using those pilot groups as part of co-management to do testing, not just in your IT department, but also in your general population. And, basically just take it a step at a time. But at the same time, make sure you don't stall on moving those workloads over. You really want to focus on getting them all moved over. Your end goal is absolutely not to just move a few workloads over and say, I'm done. your end goal is really to be fully cloud native, and just make sure you think about that. It's, co-management is not a destination. It's part of the journey. Your destination should always be cloud native.
Thanks, Clay. That was really helpful. And just to reiterate, the blog, aka.ms/best practices cloud native. Make sure to check that out. And as we mentioned, it's part of a series. We do have another question. So if we apply just because you can migrate every policy doesn't mean you should to group policy, should we follow that same philosophy with the firewall migration tool for Intune?
That is a very interesting question. Whoever provided that question, thanks, and thanks for giving me a tricky one here. So I would say that just because you can migrate doesn't mean you should absolutely be something that you keep at top of mind. With firewall policy, I think that with your Windows firewall policy, we have a firewall migration tool, as was mentioned, and I personally think that you should always, if you're looking at moving a policy, or if you're looking at taking that policy and applying it to a cloud native device, I always think it's a good thing to look at what's involved or what's included in your current policy, and actually go through line by line and say, hey, are these things needed? One of the exciting things that I have seen with the Intune Copilot, our new Intune AI offering, hopefully I'm allowed to say this. I don't know if it's been shown publicly yet, but one of the things that I'm most excited about is basically an AI pointer that will, for any of our settings, you'll be able to click on and basically see, how other customers are setting that policy, and how Microsoft sees, or recommends that you set that policy. And to me, this is really going to make things a lot easier for customers that are going through their policies to be able to just, basically dump their policies in and then choose the Copilot option. There's a little like magic wand that you can click that's going to say, hey, here's our recommendations for this. Here's how we're seeing tenants like you use this particular policy. And that's the type of functionality that I'm really looking forward to, because right now it's a manual process to go through all of these policies and really determine what's best for you. I'll say even using things like group policy analytics, it's still you're basically pulling in all of your current GPOs, and we're going to give you a list of those. And if you haven't used that tool, I highly recommend it. It's going to save you hours and hours and sometimes months of work to basically pull all of your GPOs in. And if you, we also have a blog post on how you can actually export those to a pivot table to make it much easier to digest. But what we're finding, once again, is that a lot of those old settings don't even do anything, or they're things that you really don't need. But at the same time, there are definitely settings and policies that you absolutely do need, and that you're going to need to enable in your cloud native environment. But I think that, as I said, right now, it's a pretty manual process to go and figure out what those are. But you do need to go through that due diligence. And if you are a manager of people that are doing this, make sure you give them time. Don't give them a timeline of a day. Make sure that you understand that it's going to take them a while to go through all these policies, that it's going to take them a while to figure out which of those firewall policies actually do need to be migrated. It's really something that is time consuming. And as we continue to scale out our AI initiatives and our AI tooling, I think that you'll see that time to value is going to decrease a lot. But right now, just take it easy on your IT admins that are having to go through this process.
Thanks, Clay. Danny, did you have something you wanted to chime in on?
So just like whenever you get back to it, Clay, one of the things I think is important to bring up is where do you see customers stall? You don't have to hit it now, but it's something I think that was important, because we see it internally where customers start the journey, they stall for whatever reason, workloads, zero trust, like there's all types of stuff. But at some point through our conversation today, if you can hit that, I think that's important, at least to call attention to it, where customers are stalling, how they can choose not to stall. So I'm sure this question, I thought that was important.
Danny, honestly, I'm so glad you brought this up. And it's something that I didn't even think about talking about. But when I mentioned earlier that we had this survey that was sent out last week, and around 70% of customers say that they've already started their zero trust journey. What was surprising to me is that 10% actually said that they started it, but they've completely stalled out on their zero trust journey. And what I am seeing is that a lot of it is them being overwhelmed. Once again, a lot of us are guilty of this, where we made it sound too easy at first, and customers started the journey, and then they got overwhelmed really quickly at just the scale and the amount of steps that are involved in applying these zero trust principles across your environment. And I think that's the number one thing that's stalling out customers, is they get started and they just get overwhelmed. And my advice to them is to start with our Zero Trust Deployment Center, Zero Trust Guidance Center, which we'll paste a link in chat. Brenda Carter, she's in charge of our docs team that's responsible for our Zero Trust guidance, and she's just done a tremendous job of not only providing very detailed step-by-step guidance, but also taking a step back and providing what we call our ramp guidance, or rapid modernization plan, and being able to show customers not only the long interim, all the steps, but also the short, hey, here's where to get started, here's how not to get overwhelmed. There was an internal learning session yesterday for our internal PMs on how to be a great PM while not getting overwhelmed. And I think that there are so many truths in that session for me that are things that I see with our customers, where it's very easy to just look at the big buckets. And when you just look at the big buckets and say, hey, when you start with, I need to go get zero trust deployed to all my endpoints in a month or whatever, and set a timeline for that. And then without breaking that down into bite-sized manageable pieces and manageable buckets, then you're going to get stalled out, because you're going to get overwhelmed when you really start breaking it down. So what you really need to do is break that big bucket down into sometimes hundreds of little pieces, and take each piece and assign somebody to that piece, and set up timelines for each step in there. But don't try to take these big chunks, and don't try to look at a single pillar of zero trust like endpoints or identity, like we're kind of honestly preaching for a couple of years, like, hey, just take these pillars and start with this pillar. It's really not about that. It's really taking the bite-sized chunks within that pillar and breaking those down even farther to a manageable task, and then get those tasks done. And you'll start to see progress that way. And honestly, when customers start seeing progress, when they start seeing that, hey, you know what? I got started. Now I'm actually seeing that a lot of this stuff wasn't impacting my end users that I thought would. As soon as they start saying, hey, you know what? I'm a third of the way done. Then they start moving to 50% of the way done, then 70% of the way done. And to me, that's really the best way to keep going. It's just break it down, break it into small bite-sized chunks. Great question.
Thank you, Clay. We do have a question from Dylan on LinkedIn. Can you elaborate a bit about how the hybrid join process works for laptops deployed using autopilot when the end user may not have line of sight to a domain controller?
Sure. Danny, do you want to take this one, or do you want me to? Or Steve? You're on mute.
Go for it. All yours.
No.
Yeah. So with autopilot and hybrid join, first I'll say that one of the things that we definitely recommend is for autopilot, as you're starting your autopilot journey, it's honestly, you're going to run into a lot less issues with a cloud native device. It's honestly, to me, one of the biggest draws for cloud native. There are a lot of intricacies to hybrid deployment with autopilot, as far as getting that VPN client out to the device. Which, to answer your question, like, how does hybrid intra-join work during an autopilot deployment? Basically, what we're doing is pushing out a VPN client, which will then give them line of sight to the domain controller as part of that process. Once again, that should be the journey, not the destination. But at the same time, just be prepared that you probably are going to, one, it's going to take a lot of testing. You need to absolutely make sure that you're testing this very thoroughly, that when you are going through your VPN, back through your VPN tunnel, that you are not seeing much greater delays because of network bandwidth issues, et cetera, and app deployments and other things that are slowing down your autopilot deployment, which then can cause timeouts on your the employee status page for autopilot. And there's just a lot of things there that I've seen it work very well, and I've seen customers who do very extensive testing and very extensive, making sure that they are testing every single possible scenario, and also testing it on different bandwidth via different bandwidth connections, etc. As long as you're testing it, it's definitely going to be a much better experience. But at the same time, my advice there is to, one, think about, if you are going to use autopilot, think about doing it with cloud native first, and especially for all your new devices. And then if you really want to do autopilot with hybrid intra-join, then you do have to take into account that there's probably going to be some end user experience issues, as well as some troubleshooting and help desk training that you're going to need to do. And Danny, I don't know if you have any other additions there from what you've seen.
Look, I've seen so much, and I'm not going to answer because I'll probably wind up in trouble somewhere. So it's better I say nothing. No, I'm not going to add anything there. That's a deep, dark rabbit hole we can go down. But here, I'll throw out maybe the last question before we have to close out. Question came from Benjamin on Tech Community. As a zero trust approach involves many different technologies and products, what's the best starting point for a business that already adopted most of the common 365 services?
Yeah, so great question, Benjamin. And I would absolutely say that, to follow our ramp guidance, make sure that you are following, our best practices as far as conditional access goes. To me, conditional access is really the entire basis of zero trust and our zero trust story and zero trust model, which is this identity-centric approach. And when we look at the identity-centric approach and conditional access, it's really making sure that you're actually enabling that in a secure way. And I mentioned it earlier with the workshops, where I'm seeing customers that, are starting with the compliance policy, but they're not taking that step for the next step for zero trust, which is actually blocking access using conditional access. And that's what I would say is, if you're already adopting M365 services, then, applying the conditional access rules to access for those M365 services is absolutely paramount. It's, to me, the biggest red flag when I see customers not doing this, that, hey, you thought about all these things. I've seen customers that, as we're going through their zero trust workshop, everything is green. They thought about all these things, and we get to this one thing, for some reason, this, it seems to be they're not turning it on because of the end user impact. And you really just have to get over that fear of impacting your end users, and just understand that without conditional access enabled, without actually blocking access to resources on for a compromised user or a non-compliant user or non-compliant device, then you're really leaving, in my opinion, the biggest hole and the biggest vulnerability that you could possibly leave in your environment. And you just have to start blocking those non-compliant devices and users. Absolutely, the first place that I would recommend you start is making sure that you have compliance policy, and that compliance policy is covering everything that it needs to cover. Great question, Benjamin.
So we do have one more question we might be able to fit in, but if we don't, we will get to answer all the questions directly on Tech Community. From Vaishnav K, he asked how to configure Zero Trust with Microsoft Intune.
Great question. So first I'll say that I would start with that Zero Trust Assessment link, aka.ms/ZTSS. You'll see a devices section there. There's two different devices sections actually. And the first devices section will actually give you a roadmap of all the different areas that you should be applying that Zero Trust lens with your Zero Trust deployments with Intune. And the second one is a link that will actually show you kind of, we're going to go through and look at your policies and settings and determine whether or not, you're at least on the right path for deploying those across your device estate. There are also some tools in our same product like Sentinel. Basically, we have a Zero Trust workbook that will actually go through and allow you to see what we recommend there as far as Zero Trust best practices, and actually give you pointers to the Intune console. But I would absolutely say, in deploying with Intune, to start with the Zero Trust assessment. And I will also say that we're, going to be adding in the coming months and year, you're going to see other things, especially using like Intune Copilot. We're looking at how we can use our AI tools to help you enable this more easily, and at least give you suggestions on where you should go to get started with your Zero Trust deployment and Intune. Once again, great question. Thanks for asking.
No, thank you, Clay, for the super thoughtful answers here. I feel like I've learned something, so I hope our customers have today as well. Steve or Danny, any final thoughts before we close things out?
Go ahead, Steve.
We'll attempt a
I just
from Steve.
Apologize for the close-up. My other machine crashed.
That's all right. At least you weren't late. I was late. I was, sleeping, getting my beauty.
I still love you guys.
No, I don't have any parting words. That's it. Clay did a great job. Thanks, Clay. Super appreciative of all of your pioneering on that Zero Trust front. It's actually really been great to see. Like for me, it's just been watching you grow with Zero Trust. And when you brought customers to Redmond many years ago, I would have never thought you would have stuck with it this long. But it's amazing to watch what work you've done with it.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Rochelle. It's been awesome being on the show, and definitely looking forward to hearing from customers about how we can help them deploy Zero Trust in their environment. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Clay. Thanks for the thoughtful answers. I know there were some questions we didn't get to today, so we might have to wrangle Clay into coming back again in the future. But make sure to check out aka.ms/unpacking endpoint management for our upcoming sessions and links to all of the ones we've already landed. But we hope you all have a great day, and we will see you next month.
Thanks all.